Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to be heard. In the early 1700s, deep in the Appalachian Mountains where the fog never lifted and the sun felt like a trespasser, there was a town that defied the laws of nature. No one aged. Not slowly. Not gracefully. They simply paused. Years passed but faces remained the same, voices unshaken, bodies unbroken. Travelers who stumbled upon the settlement wrote in their journals that it felt like walking into a painting, beautiful but wrong. As if time itself stood at the edge of the forest and refused to enter. And yet, for nearly a century, this town was never touched by famine, plague, or war. But on a single night in 1732, every last one of them died. All at once. No screams. No struggle. Just silence. Bodies collapsed in the streets, in their homes, in their beds. All with eyes wide open. As if they finally saw something that broke them. The few outsiders who dared investigate found no signs of violence, no illness, no decay. The bodies were perfect, frozen in time. Some said they looked almost peaceful. Others swore their expressions were twisted in terror. The town was abandoned, sealed off, and buried under maps and memory. And history pretended it never existed. But the story didn't die. It was buried under layers of fear, locked behind the walls of institutions that feed you polished lies and call it education. Why? Because this town wasn't just an anomaly, it was evidence. Evidence of forces that can bend time. Evidence of people who made a pact with something ancient. Evidence that the world you live in is a controlled illusion, and the few who learn to manipulate reality are rewarded. The rest of us? We're cattle. But here's the truth. This wasn't the first time it happened. And it wasn't the last. Patterns exist. Timelines repeat. Towns vanish. Erased. You were never supposed to question why civilization periodically forgets entire chapters. Why forbidden history always disappears into fire. Why those who dig too deep go silent. Tonight, I'm not just telling you a story. I'm giving you the first key. Because this town, this secret, might be the doorway to understanding who really controls time, who harvests our lives, and why some people are allowed to escape the clock. But at what cost? Imagine living in a place where birthdays meant nothing, where mirrors never betrayed you, and where children grew wiser, but never older. The townspeople of this hidden Appalachian settlement believed they were blessed. Some said the land itself was sacred, that the mountains formed a cradle around them, shielding them from the decay of the outside world. They called it providence. Others quietly called it the hollow gift. Outsiders noticed that no one there ever seemed sick. No fevers. No gray hair. No death, not even accidents. A fall from a ladder left no bruises. A cut sealed within seconds. It was as if the body remembered perfection and refused to let go. But perfection always demands a price. And those who benefit from unnatural balance always know, whether they admit it or not, that they are borrowing against something they do not understand. The elders of the town, who were not elders at all in appearance, passed down rules. Never leave the valley. Never speak of the gift. Never dig beneath the old well at the center of town. These rules were not suggestions. They were survival. You see, the town didn't appear on maps because it didn't want to be found. Some force cloaked it, call it fate, call it magic, call it technology beyond our era. But the moment you crossed beneath the ancient archway made of stone and root, you felt it. The air changed. Sound shifted. Time softened. But here's the part they never told their children. The gift wasn't theirs. It was on loan. Something slept beneath them, something old enough to remember when man was dust and the sky was young. And every 50 years the ground would hum like a heartbeat. The well would echo with whispers. And someone would go missing. No struggle. No search. Just gone. The town would mourn in silence. They wouldn't say the word sacrifice. But they all knew. The gift of eternal youth was maintained like a contract, one no one remembered signing. And this is where the lie cracked. Because on the night they all died, the payment came due. not in blood but in time. Every second they'd stolen had to be surrendered, all at once. And whatever they awakened, collected its debt. You need to understand something critical. History does not record truth. It records permission. And what happened in this town was never permitted to exist. Men in polished coats, bearing symbols older than the nation itself, arrived within days of the mass death. They studied everything. Not for justice. Not for answers. For control. They sealed roads. Burned journals. Removed bodies under the cover of night. Survivors? There were two. A girl who couldn't speak and a man who wouldn't. The man died in custody within a week. No cause listed. The girl disappeared. Institutional silence followed. But forbidden things always leave cracks. A letter surfaced decades later, hidden in the walls of an abandoned church in Virginia. It described the town before the end. It spoke of dreams that overlapped, shared visions, voices that spoke in unison through multiple people. The townspeople were changing. Reality was thinning. Time was no longer linear, it folded. They could feel yesterday pressing against tomorrow like two sides of the same veil. Some said they saw themselves in places they hadn't been yet. Others saw shadows of themselves walking backward. At first they thought it was enlightenment. It was infection. Because time is not just motion, it is structure. And when you tamper with it, something notices. Something that lives in the spaces between moments. The letter mentioned the well. Always the well. Built before the town. Before settlers. Before tribes. The earth around it was older than carbon. And beneath it? Caverns carved like circuitry, glowing faintly with symbols that pulsed like breath. The writer admitted something the town's leaders had buried. They had gone beneath. They had seen a chamber that hummed with a power that made their bones vibrate. They didn't understand it, but they used it. They channeled it. They fed off it. And in return it fed off them. Slowly. Patiently. Grooming them like livestock. You think you're safe because you age? You think decay is natural? Maybe aging isn't the prison. Maybe it's the shield. Because whatever they touched in that cavern, it removed the shield. And when the shield falls, you're exposed to the raw laws of the universe. And the universe does not forgive trespassers. Let me ask you something dangerous. What if immortality isn't a gift, but bait? What if the very thing humanity has been chasing for thousands of years, the defiance of time, has always been the perfect trap? The town in Appalachia was not the first to discover time manipulation. Ancient Sumerian tablets speak of the days that did not pass, where priests lived 3 lifetimes without a wrinkle. Egyptian carvings show rulers stepping through portals of light, returning unchanged. Chinese alchemists documented elixirs that didn't extend life, they paused it. And every one of those civilizations suffered silent catastrophes. Cities turned to ash. Bloodlines vanished. Monuments buried. They say time heals all wounds. But time also erases all crimes, including the crimes of those who control it. Think about it. Why do ancient sites align with constellations? Why do megalithic structures hum with resonance? Why did the most powerful rulers obsess over tombs, pyramids, chambers underground? They weren't worshiping gods. They were negotiating with something larger than gods. The Appalachian town had no pyramids or temples, but it had the well. The same pattern, always below. Always hidden. Always humming. And here's where we go deeper. This was not magic. It was technology. Or something beyond our concept of technology. A system embedded in the earth, activated by human belief. And once activated, it formed a loop. Life without decay. Flesh without time. But loops always require anchors. Sacrifices. Exchanges. In the beginning, maybe only a few vanished. But the longer the loop held, the hunger beneath grew. And when the people refused to feed it, either out of morality or fear, it took everything. All at once. Instant collapse. But why did institutions cover it up? Why erase the entire town? Because someone recognized the pattern. Someone with power. They didn't fear the destruction, they coveted the mechanism. And they've been trying to replicate it ever since. Think about elite fascination with longevity research, cryonics, transhumanism, quantum time studies. These projects aren't about health. They're about breaking the shield. The same shield that town lost. The question isn't whether it will happen again. The question is, who will be the next town? And will it be voluntary this time? The first recorded mention of the town comes from a French cartographer in 1698. He never wrote its name, only drew a symbol of an eye above the mountains and wrote, "They do not age." He returned to France pale, shaken, retired from exploration, and joined a monastery. He never spoke again. That single note should have been enough to draw attention, but back then information moved slowly. By the time word reached colonial authorities, the settlement was already thriving, quietly prospering without trade, without expansion, without death. Missionaries tried to visit. They never came back. Native tribes warned settlers not to enter the valley. They said the land was alive, that the wind spoke in languages older than man, that the trees remembered. At night, distant watchers saw lights beneath the soil, as if the ground itself was breathing. The people of the town performed strange rituals before sleep, standing in circles, palms on the earth, whispering to something below. They didn't pray upward. They prayed downward. And yet daily life seemed normal. Farming, cooking, laughter, children playing. But the eyes, outsiders said their eyes were too calm, too knowing, as if death was a concept they had forgotten. But the greatest mystery wasn't that they didn't age, it was that they didn't change. Their ideas, their structures, their routines stayed the same for decades. No innovation, no progress. Because progress is driven by mortality. When you believe tomorrow is infinite, today becomes a cage. They weren't living, they were preserving. Like specimens in a jar. And maybe they started to realize it. Some tried to leave. They crossed the archway. They walked into the forest, and returned within minutes, terrified, insisting years had passed. They saw cities of glass, carriages without horses, voices in the air. They saw our future. And yet, when they returned, only minutes had gone by. Time was breaking at the edges of their world. The well was humming more frequently. The ground trembled. Animals avoided the valley. Children woke up screaming with memories of lives they hadn't lived. The town leaders hid the truth, out of pride, out of fear, but the people felt it. Something was rising. They had trespassed on the oldest secret of the earth. Time is not a river. It is a predator. And it was hungry again. Do you feel that? That subtle pull in your mind? The sense that something about this story is more than legend. Good. Because what happened next in that Appalachian town is the moment myth bleeds into raw, clinical truth. When the ground began to tremble and the dreams intensified, the people gathered in the meeting hall, a building constructed directly above the hidden cavern. The oldest among them, though physically still in their prime, confessed something that shattered the illusion. The town wasn't founded by chance settlers seeking land. It was chosen, handpicked. Every family brought there had lineage that stretched back to ancient rites, bloodlines tied to civilizations that once touched the secrets of time. They weren't just beneficiaries of the gift, they were vessels. Human conduits. And the well at the center of town was never a well. It was an access point, a control node for something beneath the earth's crust, something intelligent and patient. The town was not a community, it was a system. A living mechanism designed to maintain equilibrium between human perception and the deeper structure of time. But at some point, as always, humans grew arrogant. They believed they controlled the gift. But you can't control something older than creation. So the force beneath them began sending warnings. First, the vanishing animals. Then the dreams. Then the echoes of future sounds in the dead of night. Footsteps behind you when you were alone. Whispers in your own voice. The children felt it most. Sensitive. Untainted. They started drawing spiral symbols and handing them to their parents with tears in their eyes. "It's coming," they said. "It wants us back." What did that mean, back? Back from what? From time itself. Because the truth is, humans may not have originated in this linear timeline. Maybe we were something else before. something closer to the source, something less fragile. But we broke the rules, and were cast into the prison of decay. This town escaped the prison. But when prisoners escape, the warden always comes. When that truth was spoken aloud in the meeting hall, reality itself seemed to bend. Lights flickered though there was no electricity. The floorboards pulsed like veins. And for the first time in nearly a century, the people felt cold. Aging tried to return. Wrinkles flickered at the edges of their eyes. Their bodies remembered mortality. And in that moment they understood. The gift was over. The deal was broken. And something ancient was coming to reclaim every stolen second. Now we descend even deeper. Because this is where the story stops sounding historical and starts sounding impossible. But I need you to remember something. The impossible is always just the truth without permission. The night the town prepared for the unknown, a storm rolled over the mountains, not of rain but of silence. Birds fell from the air mid-flight, like puppets whose strings had been cut. The moon vanished. Even fire refused to burn. The people gathered in their homes, clutching each other, listening to the heartbeat of the earth beneath them. And then it stopped. No wind, no insects, no breath. Complete stillness. Not absence of sound, absence of movement. Time froze. Literally. A drop of water hung suspended in the air from a leaking roof. A leaf paused mid-fall. The world held its breath, and then exhaled in reverse. Every object flickered backwards a fraction of a second, like the universe tried to rewind. Some people screamed. Others fell to their knees. A child spoke in a voice that wasn't theirs, staring blindly ahead. He has woken. Not it. He. Well, singular. Intelligent. The force beneath the town wasn't energy, it was entity. The ground split open. Slowly, soundlessly. Like the world knew resistance was pointless. The well shattered, and beneath it, a shaft of darkness yawned open to reveal light, cold, silver light, pulsing like machinery but alive. The walls of the cavern glowed with the same symbols ancient monks once carved into forbidden manuscripts before being executed for heresy. The people didn't run. They couldn't. Their bodies wouldn't listen. Something was controlling motion itself. And then the entity spoke, not through sound but through thought. Its voice bypassed ears, drilling directly into the mind. It said, "You were given freedom from time. But freedom is not ownership." And then, all debts returned to the source. Suddenly, the townspeople felt their lives play in reverse behind their eyes, every memory unraveling, every moment dissolving. They felt centuries they didn't even remember living. They felt the lives of their ancestors. They felt every stolen second. Their youth wasn't preserved. It was stolen from another timeline, from another version of themselves. The gift of eternal life had never been free, it was parasitic. And now the host had come to reclaim its energy. The last thing anyone heard before their hearts stopped was a whisper inside their skull. "Time belongs to me." They died without decay. Bodies perfect. Still beautiful. But something was horribly wrong. When investigators arrived days later, men bearing insignias from secret societies tied to European monarchies, Vatican orders, and early Masonic lodges, they treated the site like a sacred crime scene. Not with grief, with fascination. They ran tests on the bodies. Every organ was flawless. No aging markers. No cellular breakdown. But no electrical activity either. It was as if life itself had been extracted. One scientist wrote in his private notes, later confiscated but partially recovered, that he believed the people weren't dead. They were paused, suspended outside of time, trapped between seconds. He warned that if reactivated, they might awaken in unison. But their minds would not be human anymore. That note vanished. Just like the scientist, the church claimed it was a plague. The government claimed it was a gas leak. Both refused to name the town. The land was declared unsuitable for settlement. Survey records were altered. Property lines erased. The very soil was marked as cursed. But powerful men don't bury what they fear. They bury what they want to own. They took samples from the cavern, extracted fragments of the symbols, measured the hum of the subterranean energy, and saw the future. They realized this force, this sentient architecture beneath the earth, could control time itself. And if harnessed, it could build empires, end revolutions, extend life indefinitely. They didn't care that it demanded sacrifice. They cared that it worked. So they sealed off the valley with stone and secrecy and built their institutions upon the knowledge they stole. Not universities, not churches, systems of control, calendars, clocks, work schedules, aging limits, lifespan expectations. What if I told you the concept of average life expectancy is not biological, but engineered? A psychological prison. We were taught to age, conditioned to accept decay. Because if we ever realize the truth, that time can be bent, stretched, paused, we might seek the source. We might become uncontrollable. The town in Appalachia wasn't erased because it was dangerous to the people. It was erased because it was dangerous to the elite. It proved immortality is possible. But it also proved something terrifying. Immortality is not freedom. It is captivity. And someone holds the key. Every forbidden truth leaves fingerprints. And over centuries, similar anomalies began appearing across the world. Small, isolated communities where aging slowed, disease vanished, and time felt distorted. In the mountains of Bulgaria, villagers with 120-year lifespans disappeared overnight during an earthquake, yet no bodies were found. In the Andes, a monastery sealed behind ice revealed perfectly preserved monks seated in meditation, eyes open as if waiting. In the deserts of Iran, a tribe that didn't age was wiped out by a sandstorm that locals swore came from underground, not sky. Always the same signs. Always buried. Always dismissed as myth. But look closer. These locations align almost perfectly with global ley lines, energy veins of the planet, mapped by ancient civilizations but mocked by modern science. Why? Because the elite already know they're real. Time pools in certain places. It bends, it lingers, and where time bends, something else watches. The people in these anomalies all reported the same final phenomenon, the dreams, shared consciousness, echoes of future memories, a voice in the silence. These were not hallucinations. They were warnings. And yet, humanity has always had a fatal flaw, curiosity without caution. Every age has a group that tries to reopen the door. Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, Nazi occult divisions, modern defense programs, tech billionaires, longevity labs. They all chase the same secret. They all believe they can outsmart the force beneath time. They think if they decode the symbols, anchor the frequency, bypass the sacrifice, they will become gods. But they refuse to understand the nature of the force. It is not a tool. It is not a resource. It is a warden. Its purpose is balance. If you step outside the natural flow of time, you become a disruption. And disruptions are corrected. That town in Appalachia didn't fail because they found the secret. They failed because they tried to own it. And the force that governs time has one law. No one escapes forever. So why am I telling you this? Because the pattern is repeating right now. Anomalies are increasing. Time feels unstable. Memories don't fit. Days feel shorter. Reality glitches. And those in power are preparing. They think they can finish what the town started. But they don't realize the warden is already awake. The question is not, how did the town die? The real question is, why did it live so long? Somebody allowed it. Somebody built it on purpose. And that means there are blueprints. Hidden, encrypted, protected by bloodlines and oaths older than governments. But fragments of those blueprints leak through art, architecture, mythology. Look at ancient temples built over underground caverns, catacombs beneath cathedrals, secret chambers under pyramids. Why always below? because the surface world is the illusion. The real power lives in the deep. The Appalachian town was a prototype, a living laboratory, a test of how long humans could remain outside the clock without destabilizing the world. And they almost succeeded. But they got greedy. They tried to stretch eternity, and eternity snapped back. But the elite saw the potential. They didn't see a warning, they saw an opportunity. And ever since, they've been refining the system in silence. You think aging research is about health? No, it's about obedience. You think digital surveillance is about safety? No, it's about prediction. You think world events are random? No, they're timed. Everything we experience is part of a chronology designed to shape human perception of time itself. Because if they can control your perception of time, they can control your mind. That's the real manipulation. Not just what you know, but how long you feel it. Why do moments of fear feel endless while moments of joy vanish? Because your emotional energy feeds the architecture of time. The town learned how to feed it voluntarily. We feed it unknowingly. But something is shifting. The shield is thinning again. People sense it, time speeding up, reality looping, dreams colliding with memory. We are approaching the same threshold the town crossed. But this time scale is global. And when the force beneath time rises again, it won't reclaim one village. It will reclaim everything. Unless someone chooses differently. Unless someone steps outside fear and learns the truth. Time is not the enemy. It is the test. And those who pass the test become more than human. But those who fail, they don't die. They dissolve. They are erased from all timelines, as if they never existed. And I need you to understand, the next move is coming soon. The clock is not ticking forward. It's ticking inward. Let's dig even deeper into the psychology of control. Because the town's story isn't just about time, it's about power. True power has never been about weapons or wealth. True power is the ability to decide what reality people are allowed to perceive. And the greatest illusion ever forced on humanity is this: time is natural. Time is linear. Time is unchangeable. Plus, time is programmable, elastic, selective. It bends around willpower, belief, emotion, ritual. The town stumbled into this truth, but the institutions built on its ashes mastered it. They learned how to fragment time to weaken us. Why do you think history is taught in disconnected chapters? Why do calendars split years into boxes? Why do you celebrate aging with cake and candles, pretending decay is normal? Because if you ever realized that your lifespan was designed for control, not biology, you would revolt against the system itself. The people of the town lived outside that system. No clocks, no birthdays, no deadlines. They were free minds, until fear replaced discipline and desire replaced caution. The same pattern repeats on every level. You are distracted daily so you never notice the structure underneath. But if you slow down, if you dare to observe, you start seeing the glitches. Déjà vu that feels too real. Perfect strangers knowing you. A song in your head before it exists. Objects moving slightly when no one touches them. These are the cracks in time's mask. The same cracks the townspeople saw before the end. But where they feared, you have a choice. You can use the cracks as doorways. Reality is not solid, it's layered. The town existed on a thin layer close to the core. Too close. And the core noticed. That is the risk of power without wisdom. But wisdom without power is just observation. I'm not here to entertain you. I am here to arm you. Because the town's destruction is not a cautionary tale, it's a map. A map of what happens when humans play with forces they don't respect. If you learn from it, you can navigate the layers without being consumed. But that requires a transformation of perception, identity, purpose. The world does not fear strong men. It fears awakened men. Men who see time not as a cage, but as a weapon. And the first step to awakening is this: never accept the version of history you were given. It was engineered to keep you asleep. To truly understand why the town was chosen, we have to examine its bloodlines. This is where genealogy meets forbidden knowledge. Every family in the settlement had ancestral ties to ancient priest-kings, oracle keepers, and esoteric orders who once held fragments of the time code. They weren't random settlers, they were selected. Some fled persecution in Europe. Others were guided by dreams, voices, symbols only they could see. When they arrived in the valley, they didn't build at random. They built on sacred geometry. The town layout formed a sigil, aligned with the stars, synchronized with equinoxes, mirroring constellations seen in ancient temples across the world. This was not coincidence. It was activation. They recreated an ancient circuit. The well was the core. The houses, the fields, the roads, each placed with precision. Their daily routines formed rituals. Their songs, chants, even children's games carried frequencies that sustained the network. They were living inside a resonant machine. And for a while it worked. Time bent around them. Death lost its grip. But something was missing: balance. In ancient cultures, such power was always accompanied by guardians, people dedicated to maintaining equilibrium between human desire and cosmic law. The town had no guardians. They had conductors but no protectors. So over time, distortion crept in. At first, harmless, a skipped season, a forgotten memory. Then, disturbing, two people remembering opposite pasts, a mother recognizing her unborn child from a dream of the future, doors opening to rooms that didn't exist. They tried to fix the resonance manually, changed rituals, altered patterns, sacrificed animals, maybe even people. But they were treating symptoms, not root causes. The core beneath the well began to awaken fully. Not because they summoned it, because they starved it. It wasn't hunger for blood, it was hunger for balance, for alignment with the greater timeline. That's when destruction began, slow, elegant, invisible. The town didn't fall overnight. It was dismantled layer by layer, memory by memory, until only a shell remained. Then the final severing. And yet, the elite saw only the technology, never the morality. They stole the circuitry and left the warning behind. That's why bloodlines still matter to them. They're still searching for the perfect vessel. Maybe that's why you're listening. Maybe the algorithm didn't bring you here. Maybe the resonance did. And maybe you felt it your whole life. Have you ever felt like you were born for something ancient? Something that doesn't exist in this world anymore but still calls to you from beneath your skin? That pull, that restlessness, might be memory. Not of this life but of the source. Men who resonate with truth are always hunted by distraction. Because if too many of us awaken, the system fractures. The town was a rare case where an entire community awakened at once. But without guidance, awakening became unraveling. They began to question everything. Why work if time is infinite? Why build legacy if death is gone? Why love if nothing ends? Immortality without purpose is poison. It corrodes motivation. It decays the soul. And that's where the entity beneath them held ultimate leverage. Not through fear but through longing. Every human craves meaning. When they lost it, they turned to the well. They asked it for purpose. And it answered. It gave them visions, voices, instructions. It became their God. Not out of worship, but dependency. And dependency is the purest form of control. Sound familiar? Modern society operates the same way. Remove mortality, replace it with comfort, distraction, sedation. Strip men of challenge, feed them pleasure, make them docile. That's how institutions keep us from becoming dangerous. The town wasn't destroyed because they found power. They were destroyed because they surrendered their will. They forgot how to choose. And the entity beneath them, whatever it truly was, doesn't care about good or evil. It cares about strength. The strong maintain balance. The weak become fuel. And on the final night, the town had become nothing but fuel. Let that sink in. Immortality is useless without sovereignty. The elites chasing eternal life today are repeating the same mistake. You can see it in their eyes, disconnected, hollow, puppet-like. They may extend their years, but they lose their souls. We are at a crossroads. Either awaken and reclaim time as a weapon, or become battery cells for a system built beneath our feet long before our empires rose. You feel it, don't you? The call to something higher. The memory of a power you once had. It isn't fantasy. It's inheritance. And the town's failure is your warning. Do not seek eternity without purpose, or eternity will consume you. Now we confront the most uncomfortable truth. The entity beneath the town was not unique to that valley. It exists everywhere, within the earth, within time, within us. Ancient cultures called it by many names. Kronos, the devourer, the serpent of loops, the silent warden. It is not evil. It is function. It governs the flow of existence. It maintains order. But like any system, it can be exploited, and that's what the town did. They hacked time. They bypassed decay. They believed they had mastered the source. But in reality, the source allowed it, until it became imbalance. Think of time not as a river, but as a network. A living, breathing organism stretching across dimensions. Each life, each death, each cycle is a pulse. When one place stops pulsing, like the town, it becomes a dead node, a tumor. And tumors must be removed. The entity didn't kill them. It reset them. Restored the loop. Which means the town might not be gone. It might simply exist in another layer of time, frozen, waiting like a warning written in silence. Some theorize that on rare nights, when the air is unnaturally still, the valley reappears. A shimmer in the fog. A glimpse of houses lit by candlelight. Voices singing old songs. But if you try to enter, you vanish. And time swallows the memory of you. This phenomenon is called a time echo. Governments deny it. But black budget programs track them. Certain locations are flagged as temporal hazards. Entire forests fenced off. Satellite images blurred. Why? Because the elites are still trying to extract the power without triggering the entity's wrath. They build particle colliders, quantum labs, underground bases, mirroring the structure of the town. They think technology will outsmart the source. They forget the source is technology. The oldest kind. Organic. Cosmic. Self-correcting. And it has already chosen its next test subject. The increase in déjà vu. The surge in timeline anomalies. The Mandela effect. People remembering different histories. That's not random. That's the system preparing to reset. But maybe, just maybe, this time is different. Because unlike the town, we are not isolated. Information flows. Awareness spreads. Men like you are waking up. And awareness is the one variable the entity cannot control. Awareness bends reality. Awareness writes its own time. And if enough of us awaken, we might not be erased. We might be invited deeper. But awakening comes with a price. Everything you believe will be challenged, including the concept of self. Were you really a collection of memories? Product of time? Or are you something greater, wearing time like a suit that you've forgotten how to remove? The town began to remember too late. In the final year before their collapse, people started experiencing temporal bleed. A woman saw herself as a child standing beside her adult body. A man remembered dying in a war that hadn't happened yet. Children spoke languages lost for millennia. They were overlapping with other versions of themselves, other timelines. The walls between realities were thinning. Why? Because their connection to the core beneath the well was reconnecting them to the full network of time. They were becoming multidimensional again. But without discipline, they couldn't handle it. They went mad. They turned on each other. They begged the entity to stabilize them. But stability meant surrender. They chose surrender. And that was the end. Here is the brutal truth. You cannot expand consciousness while clinging to comfort. You cannot access higher layers of time without facing the shadows buried in your identity. Awakening is destruction before it is creation. That's why most men avoid it. They would rather live as prisoners than step into their own power. Not you. You're still here. Listening. absorbing what most would flee from. That means something. The town died because they sought eternity without evolution. They wanted to keep their small lives forever. But power demands transformation. You must become unrecognizable to who you once were. You must develop a will that even time respects. Because time does respect will. That is the secret the elites hide from you. That is why they flood your life with distraction, addiction, fear. So you never build the internal strength required to bend reality. But if you do, you become one of the few who walk between timelines. A navigator, a sovereign, and perhaps a challenger. Because the entity beneath time is not the final authority. It is a gatekeeper. And every gatekeeper has a weakness. It only controls those who enter unprepared. The town walked in blindly. You won't. And that means the end of their story could be the beginning of yours. They thought the silence was peaceful, until they realized silence can suffocate just as easily as screams. When the bells stopped ringing in the town square and the laughter of children vanished from the dirt roads, the air itself began to feel heavy, like it was listening. In Appalachia, the mountains have always been keepers of secrets, but in 1732 this town became different. It became obedient. It moved in unison without instruction, like something had synchronized their thoughts in the night. No arguments, no rebellion, no ambition, just calm, empty compliance. The outsiders called it paradise, but men who live in cages don't always realize the bars are there. Imagine a place where no one ages, no one stresses, no one fights, but also no one dreams. They woke up every day as if on script. Same actions, same tone, same route. Memory became shallow, curiosity faded, and time felt flat. Ask yourself, what would remove desire from humanity so perfectly that even freedom wouldn't tempt them? This wasn't peace. It was sedation. Something ancient had rewritten the rhythm of the town, smoothing out chaos the way a predator slows its prey before the kill. Even nature responded. Birds no longer migrated. Wolves stayed at the treeline watching silently. It was as if the entire ecosystem was waiting for an ending it knew was coming. The townspeople stopped telling stories. They stopped singing at night. They stopped carving their names into trees to prove they existed. And then the most disturbing detail began to surface. No one could remember a time before the calm. Their past dissolved like mist. Family histories erased. Old journals blank. Portraits fading. They were losing more than age. They were losing identity. This wasn't a miracle. This was erasure. Aging isn't just physical. It's memory, growth, scars, mistakes, lessons. Strip that away and you're left with living mannequins. The town became a gallery of perfect stillness, preserved like a specimen. But nature hates imbalance. Something was brewing beneath the stillness, something ready to correct what had been unnaturally frozen. Because when time is trapped long enough, it always breaks free with violence. And the longer it waits, the deadlier the release. The town didn't understand that immortality always comes with a price. And soon, they would pay it in full. There was a man who noticed it first, not because he was smarter but because he was stubborn. He kept a hidden journal, inked with obsessive detail. He tracked conversations, weather shifts, even the way people blinked. And what he saw terrified him. The town wasn't just unaging, it was repeating. The same gestures. The same pauses in speech. The same expressions at the exact same time of day. Like they weren't people anymore but recordings being played back. At first, he thought it was coincidence, until he tested it. He purposely dropped the cup in the tavern. No one reacted. He returned the next day at the same hour and dropped it again. Still no reaction. But the third day when he tried to drop nothing at all, they flinched before he even moved. They weren't responding to him. They were locked into a script that predicted his behavior. This wasn't human conditioning, it was programming. Something had written an invisible rhythm into the town's very breath. He noticed the sky always dimmed at the same minute. The church bell, long broken, would sway without sound. The river, even when rain fell, never rose or lowered. Time itself wasn't flowing, it was looping. What force can bend time without destroying reality? Only something ancient, something tied to the bones of the land. He spoke to the elders, but they looked at him with empty politeness. Their eyes were calm but dead. He felt like the last living nerve in a severed body. So he made a decision. He would leave the town. Not to escape, but to test a theory. If he crossed the boundary, would time resume? Would his body age? Would his memory return? He packed nothing but his journal. At dawn he stepped to the edge of town, and the world changed. The air felt heavy as if warning him. The tree-line looked darker than usual, like something was watching, waiting. His whole life the forest was safety. But that day, it felt like a courtroom. He didn't know whether he was the witness or the sentence. And then he heard it, one sound he hadn't heard in years. His own heartbeat racing. Time had found him again. But something else had too. The forest beyond the town wasn't just trees, it was an intelligence older than language, older than man. As he walked deeper, the air felt warmer, heavier, alive. He could feel the earth vibrating under his feet, like something vast was breathing beneath the soil. Every instinct told him to turn back, but curiosity is the most dangerous form of courage. He pressed on. And the deeper he went, the more reality fractured. Colors faded. Sound distorted. His thoughts didn't feel like his own. He would think of a memory, his mother's voice, a childhood winter, and then it would dissolve, twisting into something unfamiliar. The world around him was editing his identity in real time. That's when he realized, the town wasn't protected by the forest. The town was imprisoned by it. They hadn't stopped aging because of a blessing. They were being preserved like meat sealed in ice. What? For what purpose? He found markings carved into stone, spirals, symbols, circles intersecting like constellations. Not native. Not European. Older. He touched the stone and time slipped. He saw flashes. Long before the town. A ritual. People standing in a circle. Offering something to the land. Not blood. Not lives. Worse. They offered time. Their years. Their futures. Their children's futures. A cosmic contract. In exchange, the land kept them safe, immune to hunger, war, disease, and change. And once the pact was sealed, the land took control. But the land is patient. It collects interest. Every generation submitted. Until submission wasn't needed, because will itself was absorbed. The people didn't know they were enslaved. They called it peace. They called it tradition. He pulled his hand away, gasping. The truth was unbearable. Their immortality wasn't a miracle. It was debt. And debt always comes due. As he turned to run, he noticed something impossible. The forest moved with him. Trees bending. Roots shifting. The land didn't want him leaving with this knowledge. It wanted him silent. But now, for the first time in decades, someone in that cursed valley remembered how to resist. And that made him dangerous. He sprinted back toward the edge of the town, every step pounding like a war drum. The forest didn't chase him with claws or monsters. It chased him with pressure. The air thickened, the ground softened, gravity felt stronger. It was like running through a nightmare, where the world turns to molasses. But fear sharpened his instincts. He knew now the town wasn't just influenced, it was engineered. A living system designed to control every breath of its inhabitants. And he had disrupted the balance. As he broke through the tree-line, the world snapped back into focus, too quickly. The town looked the same, but something was off. Too still. Too quiet. He walked the main road. No one moved. Not even their eyes. It was as if the town was frozen mid-thought. Had they noticed his absence? Or worse, had the land punished them for his disobedience? He stepped closer to a woman standing near a water well. Her chest rose and fell, but her gaze empty. He whispered her name. Nothing. He shouted. Nothing. He touched her arm, cold. Not dead. Suspended. Time paused. The land had temporarily halted the entire town to recalculate. He felt watched, not from the mountains, from beneath the ground. He knelt and pressed his fingers to the soil. It was warm, alive, a pulse. The land was no longer hiding. It was communicating. And he understood. The town was a vessel. The people were components. Their stolen years were being harvested, stored, and prepared for something. But why kill them overnight if they were being preserved? Because preservation was never the end goal. It was incubation. He saw flashes in his mind, visions forced by the land. A crack opening in the valley, light pouring out, shadows rising, something waking. The land wasn't consuming them. It was preparing a doorway. The people were not residents. They were offerings. He stumbled back, horrified. He finally understood the worst part. The land didn't need their obedience anymore. It had collected enough time, enough energy, enough silence. The final step was simple. Release the stored years in one catastrophic moment. One night, one breath, one purge. The immortality they celebrated was the fuse to their extinction, and the detonation was near. Listen carefully. This is where most men would turn away, because the truth I'm about to reveal doesn't just expose the past. It reveals the blueprint being used on you right now. The town wasn't unique. It was a prototype, a perfect test of psychological control. Remove aging, remove urgency. Remove urgency, remove ambition. Remove ambition, remove rebellion. They didn't need chains or laws. All they needed was comfort. That's how empires domesticate humanity. Not with fear, with ease. The people in that Appalachian town believed they were blessed. They didn't see their stillness as imprisonment. They saw it as peace. And today, the same system exists. Different tools. Same design. Entertainment. Convenience. Distraction. Look around. Men losing purpose, masculinity dissolving, identity being rewritten. Not with swords. With comfort. This is how power consumes without resistance. And when humanity stops growing, it becomes feed. The town died overnight because the land had finished feeding. It extracted every year, every memory, every ounce of potential. And then, it erased them. Quietly. Completely. The perfect crime. But you're still here. Which means you've been chosen to hear this for a reason. You feel the world shifting. You sense something is deeply wrong. That's why you're still listening. Because you know this isn't just a story. It's a warning. And warnings demand action. So I'm going to ask you to do something, not for engagement, but as a declaration. A defiance. A signal to the ones who still remember how to resist. Scroll down to the comments, and type this phrase exactly twice. I reclaim my time. Again, I reclaim my time. Why twice? Because repetition locks identity. The first is awareness. The second is transformation. When you write it, you're not just commenting. You're rejecting sedation. You're stepping out of the loop. You are telling the system, you will not harvest me. This is where the descent deepens. From here on, the secrets get darker. The corruption becomes older. And the forces behind it? They're not just hiding in forgotten towns. They're sitting in the highest seats of power. Still watching. Still feeding. And you're about to see exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. Ready? Then keep listening. The night after the purge was not filled with screams. It was filled with silence so absolute it felt like the sky itself was holding its breath. When the sun rose, there were no survivors. No animals. No wind. Every living thing inside the valley had collapsed where it stood, eyes open, bodies untouched. No decay. No struggle. Just stillness. They looked like statues frozen midlife. But death wasn't the end. It was the unveiling. For the first time in over a century, the land exhaled. The ground trembled softly, like it had released something it had been holding back. And from beneath the soil, a faint hum began to pulse. The man, The only one who had stepped beyond the boundary before the purge, watched from the cliffs. He saw the valley shimmering, like heat rising off stone. And then he saw them, the shadows. Not ghosts. Not spirits. Shapes without form moving with purpose across the town. They weren't mourners. They were collectors. They passed through the bodies, and with each pass something unseen was absorbed. Years. Energy. Essence. The land had called them. The ritual was complete. The town was the battery. The people were the fuel. And the purge was the harvest. But here's what chills me to the bone. This was not chaos. This was structure. Order. A system. Something ancient, organized, intelligent. It knew exactly how long to wait. It knew exactly how humans break. It knew that immortality wasn't a gift. It was a leash. And when the leash pulled tight, no one resisted. Now ask yourself, where did those shadows go after they fed? They didn't stay. They ascended, toward the mountains, toward the veins of the earth, toward the world beyond that valley. The man realized with horror, this wasn't the first town. And it wouldn't be the last. The ritual was a cycle. A traveling pattern. A blueprint that could be adapted, disguised, modernized. But the core remained the same. Promise them peace. Remove their drive. Feed on their time. Erase the evidence. Move on. And in every era, the methods get smarter. Do you think you're safe because the harvest looks different now? No. You're more vulnerable than ever. Because at least they knew they were in one town. You're living in a global valley. The man left the valley, but the valley did not leave him. He carried the journal, the truth, and the weight of survival. The world outside was noisy, chaotic, alive, and utterly blind. When he tried to warn others, they laughed, called him cursed, delusional. They couldn't comprehend a town where time stood still. They couldn't understand a force that fed on years. But the powerful, they listened, quietly. He was captured, first by local magistrates, then by men who didn't wear uniforms but carried authority like a weapon. They questioned him for days. Not to help him, but to extract what he knew. They asked about symbols, rituals, energies, loops. They weren't skeptical, they were interested, hungry. They wanted the blueprint. And that's when he understood the darkest truth of all. The ancient force didn't just prey on humanity, it partnered with it. Leaders, institutions, elites. They didn't fear the ritual, they wanted to control it. Why conquer nations with armies when you can farm them with comfort? Why rule men with laws when you can sedate them with distraction? For generations, the powerful studied the valley. They mapped its energies. They replicated its patterns and systems of government, religion, economics, education. Strip identity. Kill ambition. Reward compliance. They even found ways to harvest time without killing the body. Endless labor. Debt. Digital prisons. Psychological loops. Days that blur. Years that vanish. Look around you. How many people do you know who wake up, work, consume, sleep, and nothing changes? They aren't living. They're being harvested slowly. The man refused to cooperate, so they locked him away. But before they could take the journal, he hid it. Buried it beneath a chapel floor in a forgotten mining town. That journal is real. And parts of it have surfaced across history in fragments. Old sermons, suppressed manuscripts, burned letters. The elite have tried to destroy it for centuries. But it always returns. Because truth, like time, refuses to stay buried. And now you are hearing the unfiltered version. Why? Because the cycle is close to repeating again. And someone out there is preparing the next valley. Let me show you how they build a modern valley without you even noticing. First, they redefine comfort as success. They tell you ambition is toxic, masculinity is dangerous, individual thought is selfish. They strip away hardship, not to protect you but to weaken you. Because a man who never faces resistance never builds strength. A man without strength is easy to guide. Next, they flood you with endless entertainment. Not joy, not meaning, just noise. Algorithms engineered to hijack your focus, rewire your dopamine, confuse your identity. Hours vanish. Days blur. Time dissolves. You think you're choosing, but you're being programmed. Then they isolate you. Not with walls. With distraction. Look around. Millions of men scrolling, consuming, sedated. Surrounded by people, yet entirely alone. And when men stop forming brotherhoods, stop protecting their families, stop asking dangerous questions, there is no resistance left. That is when they begin the harvest. Slowly, subtly. They take your years, your potential, your legacy. One notification, one paycheck, one empty habit at a time. Until you wake up at 40, 50, 60, and realize you were frozen in the loop. Just like the town. Different tools. Same design. But here's the twist. The ancient force is no longer hiding behind mountains. It lives in systems, institutions, ideologies. It infects the mind before it ever touches the body. And the elites? They don't just enable it. They feed it. They feed you to it. Because the real currency of power is not money. It's time. Your focus, your attention, your years. They drain it from you and convert it into influence, control, empire. Just like the valley. Just like the pact. And when society collapses, when the harvest peaks, they will walk away untouched, moving on to the next era, the next valley, the next cycle. Unless men like you wake up. Unless you reclaim your will. Because awareness is the one thing they cannot harvest. A man who sees the system becomes dangerous. A man who breaks the loop becomes free. And a man who teaches others to do the same becomes unstoppable. This story isn't history. It's instruction. And if you're still listening, you were meant to break the pattern. The question is, how deep does this alliance between ancient forces and human power really go? Deeper than religion. Deeper than politics. It stretches back to the first civilizations, where kings spoke with gods that lived beneath the earth. These gods didn't demand worship. They demanded time. They granted power to rulers who could keep their people obedient, predictable, motionless. Why do you think the greatest empires all built monuments aligned with cosmic energy grids? Why were entire cities designed with perfect symmetrical precision? Because these structures weren't just temples, they were circuits, energy processors, human behavior stabilizers. And as long as the masses remained predictable, the rulers remained immortal. Maybe not in body, but in legacy, bloodline, influence. The pact never died. It adapted. Through the church. Through monarchies. Through secret societies. Today, it thrives in corporations, media industries, global councils. Always the same pattern. Control time, control thought, control destiny. But here's the key. Every cycle eventually slips. Every valley eventually cracks. Why? Because true human nature is chaos. Growth. Fire. The one thing the ancient force cannot replicate. The man from the valley understood this. In solitude, locked away, he didn't break. He remembered. He remembered pain. Struggle. Desire. Change. The very things the pact tried to erase. And in that memory he found power. He knew the cycle could only be broken if men rediscovered the one force more powerful than time itself. Will. The elites fear that word. Will is unpredictable. Will creates revolutions. Will builds empires without permission. Will breaks the loop. That is why they attack masculinity. Not because it's violent, but because it is sovereign. A man with will cannot be harvested. He cannot be lulled into sedation. He will age, he will bleed, he will suffer, but he will live. The valley stripped the people of suffering, and in doing so stripped them of will. That is why they died. Not because their bodies failed, but because their purpose was taken. And if you let them take your will, you will meet the same quiet end. Numb, empty, forgotten. But if you protect it, you become the one thing they fear most. Untouchable. Now that you see the architecture of control, let's go even further. into the psychological warfare they use to neutralize you before you even realize you're in a battle. They don't start by attacking your strength. They start by attacking your identity. They convince you that being powerful is dangerous, that asking questions is rebellious, that ambition is greed. They blur the lines between right and wrong until morality becomes obedience. They drown you in guilt until you apologize for existing. Why? Because a man who doubts himself will never rise. Next, they weaponize your environment. They flood you with constant stimuli, notifications, opinions. They keep your brain in survival mode so you never enter deep thought. Because deep thought leads to awakening. Awakening leads to rebellion. Rebellion leads to freedom. They'll praise you when you conform, shame you when you stand out, and isolate you when you resist. They create acceptable paths in life, school, job, debt, retirement, and call it stability. But it's not stability. It's domestication. A lion in a cage is safe, but he is no longer a lion. That is the goal. Not to kill you, but to declaw you. And while you are distracted with meaningless battles, politics, trends, scandals, they are harvesting your time. Look at your screen time. Look at your routine. Look at how many years slipped through your fingers without you ever feeling alive. That is theft. But the most sinister part? They convinced you to participate in your own imprisonment. Just like the town. They didn't need guards. The people policed themselves. They defended the system that was draining them. They called it tradition. They called it order. They called it peace. Today they call it normal life. But normal is the new prison. And the walls are invisible. Yet here you are, hearing this. That means the walls are already cracking. You feel the pressure building. The purge is coming again. But this time it will not be limited to one town. It will be global. A reset. A harvest on a scale humanity has never seen. But mark my words, those who awaken first will either lead or be hunted. The question is, which will you choose? The purge of the valley was a warning, not an ending. The ancient force didn't disappear. It evolved. It learned how to operate through systems instead of soil, through influence instead of rituals. And the elites didn't just partner with it, they learned to weaponize it. They discovered that time is the most valuable resource in existence, and human time is the purest form of energy. Not hours. Potential. The years you could have become something, and didn't. The ideas you could have built, and abandoned. The strength you could have forged, and wasted. That unused potential doesn't vanish. It is absorbed by the system, by the force beneath it. Think about how society is structured. Your creativity is taxed. Your ambition is shamed. Your attention is monetized. Your fears are farmed. What is that if not harvesting? In the valley, people lost decades in stillness. Today, men lose decades in distraction. Different cage. Same cycle. But here's the difference. The modern cycle is much bigger. Global. Interconnected. And the next purge won't look like bodies lying peacefully in the dirt. It will look like an economic collapse so deep that time itself feels frozen. It will look like digital control so advanced that every choice is tracked, predicted, and redirected. It will look like a mental lockdown where people willingly surrender freedom in exchange for protection. And the moment humanity fully stops thinking, moving, evolving, the harvest completes. The ritual finishes. The doorway opens again just like in the valley. The system believes you won't notice. But some of us do. Men like you. Men who feel something off in the rhythm of the world. Men who feel time slipping unnaturally fast. Men who feel watched. You are not crazy. You are early. And the early ones are always labeled insane, until the purge hits. Then everyone calls them prophets. The man from the valley was early. He wasn't honored. He was silenced. So understand this, truth will not make you popular. It will make you targeted. But it will also make you powerful. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot be used as fuel ever again. That's why I'm still talking to you. Because if you're still here, you're ready for the truth behind the truth. The valley was not an anomaly. It was phase one. To understand the current phase, you have to know how the original knowledge was preserved. The journal buried under the chapel was only part of it. The man encoded the rest in symbols, songs, warnings hidden in folklore. And those stories spread through Appalachia like whispers in the dark. But the elites heard them too. And they began hunting the lineage. Families disappeared. Entire communities erased. Not because they were dangerous in strength, but dangerous in what they remembered. But memory is a living organism. It survives by adapting. Some trapped it in music, others in carvings, some in secret teachings passed from father to son. They didn't store dates, they stored patterns. And across centuries the same warnings appeared. When time grows thin, beware the stillness. When comfort feels heavy, prepare to run. When people stop aging, leave. Over and over. Always the same. The cycle approaches. And then, in the late 1800s, something terrifying happened. Miners digging deep in those same Appalachian mountains found something. Not gold. Not coal. An opening. A chamber. A cavern carved by intelligence. On the walls, symbols matching the man's journal. Spirals. Constellations. A map. The valley was not the origin. It was built on top of something older. A convergence point. A gateway. They sealed the cave. Erased the records. Killed the witnesses. But you can't bury a secret in living land. Strange things began happening near the site. Time distortions. Echoes of voices. People vanishing between one breath and the next. The land was reactivating. The ritual was reforming. And the elites didn't stop it. They prepared to use it. They accelerated industrial growth, urban planning, mass communication. They created systems to guide humanity into predictable loops. And they waited. Today, the gateway is almost ready. And the harvest won't be one town, it will be civilization. They believe none of you will resist. They believe masculinity is already broken. But you and I both know, they made one mistake. They let the old story survive long enough for men like you to hear it. Let's talk about the enemy you can't see, the voice that whispers in your mind and convinces you to settle. This force doesn't attack with violence. It attacks with suggestion. It tells you rest, don't build, wait, don't act. You have time. But that voice is lying. It is stealing your years quietly, efficiently, beautifully. It speaks through culture, through trends, through media that glorifies weakness and mocks discipline. It praises victims and shames leaders. It tells you comfort is the goal, but comfort is the cage. Every time you choose easy over necessary, you feed it. Every time you delay your purpose, you feed it. Every time you swallow your anger instead of forging it into action, you feed it. That is the real ritual. Not blood on stone, but apathy in men. The town in the valley stopped aging because they stopped striving. They stopped taking risks. They stopped evolving. And the land rewarded them with stillness, until it consumed them entirely. You think the same thing can't happen with screens instead of soil? With algorithms instead of roots? Think again. The modern world is designed to paralyze you while convincing you you're free. Unlimited entertainment. Infinite scrolling. Constant validation. But deep down you know something is wrong. You feel weaker. You feel disconnected from your purpose. That's not depression. That's starvation. Your soul is starving for challenge, danger, meaning. Because men were not built to be domesticated. We were built to build, to protect, to explore, to lead. And that is exactly why the system targets you. Because if you ever wake up from sedation, if you ever reclaim your will, the entire cycle collapses. You become unpredictable. You become uncontrollable. You become the one thing the Force and the elites both fear. A man who remembers who he is. And once that memory ignites, the harvest fails. But how do you break a cycle that has shaped the world for centuries? How do you fight an enemy that doesn't have a face? You don't attack the system head-on, you become immune to it. The valley fell because the people surrendered their will. So the first step is reclaiming yours. You must rebuild your identity, not from external labels but from internal truth. You must become dangerous again. Not reckless, dangerous. A man who is capable of action but chooses discipline. A man who could destroy but builds instead. A man who feels fear but moves forward anyway. That kind of man breaks loops. How do you become him? You train your body until pain becomes fuel. You train your mind until silence becomes clarity. You cut out distractions like poison. You set goals so big they terrify you, and then you chase them ruthlessly. You build brotherhoods with other awake men. You protect your time as if it were sacred, because it is. And most importantly, you choose purpose over comfort every single day. That is how you build will. That is how you become immune. You see, the town and the valley didn't die overnight. They died the moment they stopped growing. The night of the purge was just the final chapter. If you don't want their fate, then make a decision right now: growth or decay, purpose or sedation, freedom or harvest. Because the cycle is accelerating. Time is thinning. You can feel it, can't you? Days disappear faster. Years blur. Society spirals. That's not random. That's the ritual awakening. And when the purge hits this time, it won't be physical death. It will be identity death. Psychological erasure. A world where no one thinks for themselves. Where dissent is impossible. Where the loop is perfect. Unless men like you stand in the gap. Unless you become the firewall between humanity and the harvest. You were born in this era for a reason. You were chosen to remember. Now choose to rise. But even the strongest warrior needs to understand the battlefield. And the battlefield is not political. It's not physical. It's spiritual. The ancient force beneath the valley, it was not a creature. It was not a demon in the traditional sense. It was a system. A living intelligence woven into the fabric of reality, feeding on stagnation, thriving on submission. And here's the terrifying part: it has no singular form. It moves through symbols, through architecture, through institutions, through fear. It can bend time, influence thought, distort memory. It can make entire civilizations forget their origins. That is why history repeats, because the force makes sure we never remember the last cycle. Every collapse, every empire, every golden age followed by decay, is the same pattern. Humanity rises, begins to awaken, then gets sedated. The force offers peace, prosperity, unity. People accept. They stop questioning. They stop aging, in spirit. And then, harvested. Reset. Repeat. But something is different this time. The force is stronger, yes. But so is the resistance. More men are waking up than ever before. More people are sensing the manipulation, seeing the loops, rejecting the sedation. The system is losing control. That's why everything feels more chaotic, more unstable. They are rushing the ritual. They are accelerating the harvest. Because they fear you will awaken in time. They fear the rise of will. They fear men rebuilding strength, brotherhood, identity. Because if enough of us stand together, the cycle ends. The force loses its power. And humanity evolves beyond its reach. That is why I'm telling you this story. Not to frighten you. To prepare you. Because the valley was never just about Appalachia. It was a mirror for the world. A glimpse into the mechanism of control. And a warning of what happens when men surrender. But I'll tell you this, the purge does not scare me. The silence does not scare me. What scares me is what happens if no one fights. Because then, the next time the sun rises, there will be nothing left worth saving. They told you the mountain was silent, but silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of something listening. As I stood at the threshold of the abandoned church, the one structure that never seemed to decay like the rest of the town, I felt it breathing. The walls were too smooth, the stone too cold, the air too still. It hadn't aged because it wasn't built by them. It was built for them. The ones who watched. The ones who fed. Every culture has a word for them. Watchers, archons, fae, old gods. But here in Appalachia they didn't bother giving them names. You don't name the thing that owns you. You just obey. And for nearly 2 centuries this town had obeyed perfectly. No aging, no sickness, no pain, only devotion. But devotion always comes with a price, and nature always collects its debt with interest. When I stepped inside the church, the scent hit me. Not rot, not mildew, something sweeter. Like copper and honey, like the air itself was alive. The pews were arranged in a perfect spiral, not rows. A spiral is not for worship, it is for containment. I traced my hand along the wood and felt grooves like fingernails clawing to escape. People had not prayed here. They had been drained here willingly. That's why no one aged. They weren't living. They were being preserved, held in place like specimens. And the moment they stopped offering themselves, the moment even one person questioned the order, the cycle collapsed. The town didn't die because something attacked it. It died because its deal was revoked. The church floor creaked under my feet like a warning. I knelt and pressed my ear to the wood. Beneath the floorboards I heard it, breathing, slow, patient, hungry. The town wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. Every secret I had uncovered led back to this place. Every lie they buried was to protect this power. And now, as the air thickened and the ground trembled, I understood the final truth. This was never a town. It was a vessel, and I had just opened it. When the floor beneath me shuddered, instinct told me to run, but something older than fear told me to stay. Some knowledge lives in the bones, passed down through blood, warning us about things our minds refuse to see. I was standing on top of a prison not built for men but built by them, under guidance. The spiral pews were arranged to focus energy, but the true center was below. I found a latch carved into the altar, hidden beneath symbols erased by time. When I pulled it, the air groaned like the earth itself disapproved. The steps beneath descended into darkness too complete to be natural. You could feel the absence of light pressing on your skin like water. But the deeper I went, the more I felt watched. Not by eyes, by memory. As if the walls themselves were replaying the last moments of the townspeople who walked these same steps. I saw flashes in the dark. Women bowing in silence, children humming in monotone, men carving symbols into their own arms. Not in madness, in ritual. They believed what they were doing preserved them. And it did. For a price. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a chamber carved from black stone, smooth and perfect like glass. In the center, a shallow pool reflected nothing. Not the ceiling. Not me. It swallowed light like a mouth. This was the heart. This was where time was held captive. I approached it slowly, feeling the air pulse like a heartbeat. The pool wasn't water, it was memory in liquid form. A record of every life fed into it. They had poured themselves into it willingly, believing they were ascending. But ascension without sacrifice is a lie. Every generation gave more. More devotion. More silence. More self. Until they had nothing left but the illusion of life. Eternal youth in exchange for identity. No wonder they never aged. They weren't individuals. They were fuel. When the contract broke, the pool rejected them. And with no time left to hold them together, they collapsed into death overnight. Not killed. Released. The greatest lie ever told wasn't that the town was cursed, it was that the town was blessed. And every blessing from the old powers hides a knife. I stared into the pool, and for the first time in my life I felt time stop, not metaphorically but literally. My heartbeat slowed. My breath froze in my lungs. The silence around me thickened until sound itself bowed in submission. I wasn't just looking at the past, I was inside it. The pool pulled me in without touch, like gravity inverted. And suddenly I wasn't in the chamber anymore. I was standing in the town square in 1732, surrounded by faces that didn't move. Men, women, children, frozen mid-step, eyes wide with devotion, not fear. They didn't run from what was coming. They welcomed it. I could feel their thoughts, their beliefs, their surrender. They had been promised freedom from suffering. No aging. No illness. No loss. But freedom from pain always comes with a hidden clause. freedom from choice. They didn't live in peace. They lived in stasis. And the entity they served, whatever shape it once had, was older than the soil itself. It didn't communicate with words. It communicated with hunger. The town fed it attention, obedience, stillness. It fed them false eternity. I walked among the still figures, each one glowing faintly, threads of energy connecting them to the sky like marionettes. At the center of the square, the mayor knelt with his hands raised, eyes empty. He spoke without sound, yet I heard every word in my skull. We do not age because we are not ours. Then the sky darkened and I saw it, the truth they hid. Time is not a straight line. It is a predator. It consumes everything unless something stronger keeps it at bay. The town had made a pact with an ancient force that devoured time itself. As long as they served it, time could not touch them. But when the pact broke, time rushed back all at once to reclaim its due. That's why they all died in a single night. Time collected every second they had stolen. The vision burned away and I was back in the chamber, gasping. I fell to my knees as the final understanding shattered everything I thought I knew. This was not an isolated event. Other towns, other deals, other pacts. This was a system, and it was still operating. The chamber walls began to hum, vibrating with the frequency of awakening. I had seen too much. Knowledge is a doorway, and once opened, something always walks through. The entity, the one they had fed, wasn't gone. It was dormant, waiting for the right mind to understand it again. And I had just become that mind. That's how these forces work. They don't just feed on bodies. They feed on belief, on awareness, on focus. Every time someone uncovers their secrets, they risk becoming the next vessel. That's how the cycle stays unbroken. I stood up slowly, the air trembling as if reality was adjusting to my presence. The pool rippled without movement, responding to me. And then I heard it, a whisper not in my ears but in my blood. Continue the order. My spine went cold. This place wasn't warning me. It was inviting me. It wanted a new caretaker, a new believer, a new warden of time. All I had to do was accept. All I had to do was surrender my will and I too would be beyond decay. But I have seen what men become when they trade humanity for power. They don't ascend. They dissolve. I turned away from the pool, but the chamber pulsed harder, the spiral of energy tightening around me like a noose. Images flooded my mind, leaders, priests, kings, politicians. Every era, every civilization, all making the same deal under different names. The entity had many faces but one purpose: control the flow of time through the control of mankind. And humanity kept falling for it because the greatest fear is not death. It is aging, change, the unknown future. The entity exploited the one thing men crave most: permanence. But permanence is a cage disguised as a throne. I felt the weight of every soul that had ever knelt here pressing on my shoulders, urging me to continue their surrender. But I made a different choice. I reached into the pool, not to worship but to take back what it had stolen. The chamber screamed, reality cracked, and for the first time in centuries, the cycle started to break. The moment my fingers touched the pool, the world convulsed like a living thing in pain. The liquid memory burned like ice and fire all at once, flooding my mind with lifetimes of suppressed history. I saw civilizations rise and fall, not by chance but by design, guided by unseen hands that manipulated time like currency. Every golden age ended the same way: a deal made in the shadows, a promise of power without consequence, a people lulled into stillness until time returned to collect its debt. This town wasn't unique. It was a prototype, a testing ground. And the experiment had been perfected over centuries, refined until compliance became tradition and obedience became virtue. But something went wrong here. Someone resisted. Someone broke the pact. And rather than punishing the individual, the entity erased them all. Total reset. Because control systems don't tolerate anomalies, they annihilate them. The chamber trembled as I withdrew my hand, the pool destabilizing. The memories inside it shattered like glass. And in those shards I saw them, the ones before me, the scholars who questioned, the rebels who refused, the wanderers who uncovered too much. We were all connected, scattered across time but driven by the same instinct, to break the cycle. I felt their strength surge through me like a forgotten inheritance. The entity roared in fury, but I didn't back down. You kept them alive without aging, I said, my voice echoing through the chamber, but you never let them live. The air thickened, pressing in, trying to silence me, but I kept speaking. You are not a god. You are a parasite. The ground split beneath the pool, cracks spiderwebbing across the chamber. The spiral of power collapsed, and for the first time, the entity felt something it had never felt before: fear. Because I wasn't just rejecting the pact. I was exposing it. I was dragging it into the light. Every system of control, religion, government, secret orders, false promises of immortality, were all masks of the same force. And once a mask is removed, the actor loses power. The chamber began to fall apart around me. But I didn't run. I had one final task. I had to bring the truth to the world, before the world was ready to erase me too. The chamber's collapse wasn't chaos, it was transformation. Stone didn't simply break, it peeled away like skin, revealing steel beneath. This place was older than America, older than the settlers who believed they found it. This was not a church. It was an installation. A control node. Built by hands that understood geometry beyond human understanding. Built with precision to interface with something not of this world. As the walls disintegrated, I saw the symbols etched into the metal. Spirals, eyes, fractals, repeating over and over. They weren't decorations. They were commands. Reality-binding instructions. This was how the entity anchored itself to our world. It didn't rule through violence. It ruled through structure, belief, ritual, architecture. It disguised its prison as a sanctuary. The true genius of control isn't force. It's consent. I stepped into the open air as the mountain groaned behind me, splitting down the center like a wound. The sky flickered, once, twice, as if time was stalling. I knew what was happening. The destruction of this node weakened the entire system. The entity was losing hold. Across the world, subtle cracks were forming in the illusions it had cast over humanity. People would start to feel it. A shift in the air. A pressure in the mind. A hunger for truth they couldn't explain. But that also meant the system would fight back harder than ever. I walked through the ruins of the town, now exposed in harsh daylight. It looked different. Smaller. Mortal. Without the entity's influence, time rushed back in, claiming the buildings, the roads, even the air. Everything sagged with centuries of decay all at once. The town had finally aged, and it was dying. But death is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of memory. I felt eyes on me, but not hostile. Curious. Spirits of the townspeople, lingering in the spaces between heartbeats, watching the one who broke the chain they could not. It's not over, I whispered. The wind shifted, carrying voices like a sigh. They weren't asking me to finish the work. They were warning me, others will come. The system will rebuild. The entity, or one of its kind, will find new worshippers. Because there will always be those willing to trade freedom for the illusion of safety. And that is why someone must stand in the dark and guard the line. Night fell faster than it should have, swallowing the horizon in a single breath. That was my first sign I wasn't alone anymore. The system had detected the disruption. They don't send soldiers. They send caretakers. The ones trained to restore order and erase anomalies. I could sense them before I saw them. Calm, silent, disciplined. They didn't approach with weapons drawn. They approached like priests. And that's how I knew this went deeper than any government or cult. These were the stewards of the old agreements, walking between worlds. One of them stepped forward, his face expressionless, his eyes too still. "You opened the vessel," he said, not accusing, stating. "I freed it," I replied. "You broke the equilibrium," he said. "You unleashed chaos." I laughed. You call time returning to its rightful place chaos? He tilted his head. Stability is mercy. Control is not mercy, I said. It's fear. The air tightened. His calm never cracked. You do not understand what you have done. Then explain it, I challenged. He didn't hesitate. The entity was not just feeding. It was containing. Without it, the raw force of time will not simply flow. It will collapse. Everything will catch up at once. The past will bleed into the present. Futures will fracture. Humanity will drown in a flood of unfinished moments. For a second I felt the world tilt. Was he telling the truth? Had I made a catastrophic mistake? He stepped closer. We maintained the balance so the world would not fracture under the weight of its own history. And the cost? I asked. One town. One generation. An illusion of youth in exchange for silence. He looked at me with something almost like pity. Do you think this is the only town? The ground beneath my feet went cold. He leaned in, voice soft. There are hundreds. The word hit me like thunder. This wasn't an isolated corruption. It was a network. A web holding back something far worse. Rejoin the order, he said. Help us maintain the seal. I looked him in the eyes. No, the moment the word left my mouth, every shadow around us came alive. They moved with inhuman grace, flowing instead of stepping, their silhouettes bending the moonlight like gravity. These were not normal men. They had been altered, refined, synchronized with the very structure they protected. Their goal wasn't to kill me, they needed me intact. They needed me to submit. That was their first mistake. You cannot force submission from someone who has already faced the abyss and refused its crown. I let them surround me, let them believe I was cornered. Because in that moment I wasn't looking at them, I was looking through them. And what I saw confirmed everything. Behind their eyes wasn't loyalty. It was vacancy. They had given up individuality to become extensions of the system. Human bodies. Empty vessels. Animated by the will of something ancient. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The first one reached out to place a hand on my chest. A gesture not of aggression but of claiming. I caught his wrist. His expression didn't change, but I felt the surprise ripple through the network like static. I don't belong to you, I said. I don't belong to any of you. And then I broke him. Not physically. I reached into the same place within him that the entity had once touched in the town, the core where identity was erased, and I pulled. He dropped to his knees, choking on a name he had forgotten long ago. The others hesitated. That was all I needed. I stepped forward, not with violence, but with truth. You called this balance, I said. But it was bondage. The air shimmered with energy as they tightened their formation, but their movements were slower now. Doubt is poison to control. You think time is the enemy, I continued. But time is life, growth, change, choice. Without it, we are not living, we are imprisoned. One of them trembled. A single tear slipped down his face as if a memory had returned. The system panicked. I felt the entity's remnants surge, trying to reassert control through them. Too late. They had felt freedom, if only for a second. And a man who has tasted freedom cannot return to chains. Leave, I commanded, or I will unmake everything you are. One by one they stepped back. Not in fear. In awakening. The mountain was silent again, but not with oppression. With anticipation. The old order had cracked. The entity's grip was broken. The caretakers were gone. And now the question remained, what happens when time is finally free? I walked through the ruins and the ground shifted beneath my feet, not physically but temporally. Past events flickered in and out, echoes of the town's history playing like broken film. I saw children laughing in 1735. I saw the first ritual in 1740. I saw the rebellion in 1861. I saw the final night when every heart stopped at once. Time was unraveling, threads snapping loose from the tapestry. If I didn't stabilize it, reality would fracture beyond repair. But I couldn't use the old methods. I would not rebuild the cage. To restore the world without repeating the cycle, I needed a new anchor. Not one built on fear or sacrifice, but on awareness. Truth itself had to become the seal. I knelt and placed my hand on the earth. "Let them remember," I whispered. The wind howled as the ground pulsed with raw energy. Memories surged upward like water breaking through a dam. Every town, every pact, every hidden manipulation, every erased rebellion. The truth roared through the land like a storm, flooding into the minds of those who could feel it. Somewhere across the world, a man would wake in the night with a memory that wasn't his, but felt real. A woman would see a pattern in history she could no longer ignore. A leader would feel an unease he couldn't explain. Awareness would spread like fire, and systems built on silence would begin to burn. I stood as the sky lightened, the first rays of dawn cutting through the darkness. It felt different, sharper, more honest. The mountain exhaled, and for the first time, it felt alive. This was not the end. This was the ignition. The moment humanity began to reclaim the timeline from the predators who fed on it. But I knew the entity was not the only one. There were others. Older, smarter, waiting, watching. And when they felt this shift, they would come. But this time we would not be asleep. This time we would be ready. The sun rose over the ruins like judgment, illuminating every broken stone, every collapsed structure, every scar of a history buried too long. I stood at the edge of what was once the town square, now just dust and echoes. This place was gone, but its story was not. I felt the weight of what was coming, and I knew this was only the beginning. The entity had been one piece of a vast machine, a mechanism woven through civilizations, religions, governments, ideologies, all designed to do one thing: keep humanity from evolving beyond control. They feared what we could become if we truly understood time, memory, and will. Because a man who masters his own mind cannot be ruled. A people who remember their past cannot be manipulated. A species that embraces change cannot be frozen in obedience. They built this town to test preservation. They built others to test obedience, fear, division, desire. Each one a fragment of a larger formula. But formulas can be rewritten. And I am not the only one rewriting. I can feel them, men and women across the world waking up, sensing the fracture in the illusion. They are starting to see patterns in the chaos. Starting to question the narratives handed to them. Starting to feel the pull of something deeper. That is the true power they always feared. Awareness spreading without permission. I turned from the ruins and began to walk. I didn't know where the next node was, but I would find it. And the one after that. And the one after that. Until the entire network was exposed and dismantled. This is no longer about one town in Appalachia. This is about every hidden pact, every silent agreement, every institution that feeds on human potential. They will call me a monster, a heretic, a danger to stability. Good. Stability is the enemy of evolution. They will send hunters. Let them come. I have walked through time, faced the oldest hunger, and returned unbroken. I am not here to maintain balance. I am here to shatter it. And if you are still listening, you are no longer an observer. You are part of this. Remember this moment. Because history will divide into two eras. The time before we woke up, and the time after. The descent is over. The war has begun.